I must note here in Pennsylvania that the inhabitants are encountered everywhere. This province is more loyal to the king than all the others. Therefore, nothing is taken from the inhabitants.
Dear son, you're anxious to know how the times are affected. I think I have not heard of any of them wishing for the British Tartars since they left us, which was September 11th. They came here September the 9th. They ravaged the place as completely as a horde of savages would have done.
Two competing versions of the same event. Who do we choose to believe? Or is one necessarily wrong for the other to be right? What if we could know the identity of each landowner as the British or American troops marched across their properties? What if we had the ability to determine if the landowner was a Quaker, Mennonite, or Presbyterian, or a slave owner, tavern keeper, blacksmith, or mill owner? To see at a bird's eye view which properties were plundered by the British, the Hessians, or the American forces, and which properties were left untouched. Now we can. As the British and Hessian troops advanced into Chester County, they encountered a notable thing: people. Before the British landed at the head of Elk, word had spread like wildfire throughout the area. With advance warning, many residents took the opportunity to flee. In Cecil County, Maryland, an area dominated by the Scots-Irish, who, of all groups, understood what was coming, the British Army encountered deserted farms. Once in Delaware, much of the Welsh Baptist inhabitants had also left, among them the family of John Evans, Esquire, who was serving as a Pennsylvania State Supreme Court Justice, recently appointed in August 1777. He sent his family from the Newark area to his estate in London Britton Township. If the British Army had headed due north from the head of Elk, they would have received a different reception in an area largely settled by the Scots-Irish. Instead, their path led them into a heavily Quaker area. This was why they encountered people. When Catherine Baird referred to them not wishing for the British Tartars, she was likely alluding to her Quaker neighbors in Kennett Township. Refusing to support the war effort by participating in local government or paying taxes, Quakers were left open to retribution. With little protections offered them under the new government, militia units, tax collectors, and American sympathizers constantly harassed Quaker residents, taking their cattle, goods, and money to compensate for their lack of support for the American cause. Records of Quaker sufferings at the hands of their neighbors recount these abuses. Understood in this context, is it any wonder that they initially looked upon the British forces as a restoration of order and protection they had gone without? The Quakers were not the only group who may have had a more favorable opinion of the British. For the enslaved population of the county, the British represented freedom, which continued to be denied them under the new American government. It is estimated that over 20,000 freedom-seeking enslaved African Americans served in the British Army. Among them were Jim, Isaac, and George, who ran towards the British in September 1777 and away from their enslavement in Oxford Township. The damage done initially by British troops varied from location to location. As the troops under General Kniphausen went northwest down the Newport Road, they left the area along the Newport and Nottingham roads relatively unscathed. Perhaps this is where the Hessian Jägers' perception that they did not have to plunder was formed. The story, however, was different as the British entered southwestern Kennett Township. The damage to this township was extensive and long-lasting. Catherine Baird, writing to her son, Dr. Absalom Baird, a doctor in the Continental Army, recounts the destruction of the village of Kennett Square in detail.
They took from my landlord, James Walter, 6 horses, 16 head of cattle, and 20 sheep, being his whole stock. plundered his barn of wheat, rye oats, and hay, and his house of between 300 and 400 weight of cheese and all the provisions we had. They took your fine linen shirts, your breeches, and regimental coat. William Hutcheson was in danger of his life by this last. It was at his house, and they tried but could not get it on him, so he was saved, but they took the coat. They used the rest of the neighborhood no better, and some much worse. Some they stripped. They entirely destroyed all that James Ellis had, and Joseph Walter. They stripped him his wife and the lame girl, cut the drawers and desk open with their hatchets, and left it like a waste. I earnestly desire you to take care of yourself, lest you fall into their hands, for they are a cruel and bloodthirsty crew. I wish I may never see any of them again.
Charles and his wife Sarah Hall purchased 20 acres on the outskirts of Kennett Square in 1759. Described by his wife as an industrious, frugal man, Charles lost 70 pounds worth of property by the ravages of the British Army, a sum that was devastating for a small farmer to recover from. After Charles and 3 of her children died of a malignant fever, Sarah requested aid from the Quaker Meeting for Suffering in Philadelphia. Sarah, like her neighbor Catherine, was not spared the devastation, even though, as a Quaker, she may have looked upon the arrival of the British forces with hope. Unlike Catherine, a Scots-Irish Presbyterian who, with little doubt, already despised them. The devastation would continue down the Nottingham Road as the British advanced towards Chadds Ford. The story was different to the north, as the troops sent to flank the Continental Army's position entered East Marlborough Township. For much of the march through this township, few inhabitants recorded claims for damages. Why? The answer may lie in a few factors. At the center of Kennett Square was the tavern operated by Peter Bell, but owned by Robert Morris of Philadelphia, later known as the financier of the Revolution, a fact likely known to the British, who had access to many local informants. Unlike the section of Kennett Township to the south, which had a slightly more diverse population, East Marlborough remained almost exclusively Quaker. In East Marlborough, 2 known loyalists owned property. One of them, John Jackson Jr., served as a guide to the British troops as they flanked the Continental Army. Jackson, along with Curtis Lewis from neighboring West Bradford, were likely with the troops as they marched through the township. There is also extensive evidence in the Quaker suffering records that the population of this township was continually harassed by the American militia in the months leading up to the British Army's arrival. These factors may have saved some of the residents of East Marlborough the wrath experienced by their neighbors in Kennett Square, but in the end the damage would pick up again as the army turned onto the road to the Great Valley and entered into West Bradford Township. The farmers along this road were also Quaker, but why this changed at this specific point cannot be answered with the available records at this time. Damage claims remained sporadic in East Bradford Township just before the armies engaged at Chadds Ford. No claims were made for families who lived to the north of Birmingham Hill. Indeed, the property of William Jones, depicted in this contemporary watercolor and in the middle of the fighting, was specifically noted by the tax assessor as not plundered in the months after the battle. Damage to property owners directly caused by the engagement appear not to have factored into any claims made afterwards. Only property intentionally destroyed or taken by the British were submitted. After the Americans retreated, the British continued to plunder the surrounding farms in Birmingham Township. Few properties from Birmingham Hill south were spared. The Dilworth family were particularly hard hit by the British, and their individual response and subsequent reaction to events provide some insight into the dilemma most Quakers faced. Caleb Dilworth was one of the younger sons of James and Lydia Dilworth. In the hours before the Battle of Brandywine, his grandfather's team was pressed into the Continental service. He had gone along to take care of the horses. For this and paying the militia tax, Caleb was disciplined by the Concord monthly meeting. Caleb would remain in good standing with the Quakers, but 2 of his brothers would follow a separate path. James Jr. would be the first to take the oath of allegiance to the new American government in July of 1777, 1 month after being disowned by the conquered monthly meeting. And his brother Charles would remain a member in good standing until a few months after the battle, when he would also take the oath to support the American cause, thus forcing the monthly meeting to disown him. The story does not end here, and the devastation continued as the British pushed further into Chester County, on their path to reach their ultimate goal, Philadelphia. None of Chester County's original immigrant groups would be spared in this campaign. The German Mennonites in East Whiteland Township would be the first of their peoples to experience the damage suffered by the other groups. And like their Quaker neighbors, their pacifist beliefs would continue to cost them in later years, as they were financially penalized by double taxes for not supporting the American cause. As research continues and future townships are completed, new insights will be gained, well-worn stories will be challenged, and a more complete picture will emerge. As the scattered sources are pieced back together, the lives devastated, the decisions made, the consequences suffered, may be seen in a different light. By mapping the path of devastation and shattered lives wrought during the Philadelphia campaign, the extent of the human suffering brought by this war comes into sharper focus, not trivialized as an anecdotal aside. The civilian element can now be placed beside the military, and in doing so, another layer of context can be added to a complicated piece of our common American story.